I want to talk about injection of trees, some of the systems, some of the problems with some of the systems, and some of the differences in methodology. For someone starting out in PHC and considering injection technology, quite frankly, there are numerous confusing and widely different opinions on what to do. You're going to hear one person tell you this product is best, another one say this system is best. Trying to sort that out is really critical. Believing in the ArborJet technology requires that you do your research and that you understand the factors that affect successful treatment. ArborJet started out as what I like to call Arbor Who. People didn't have any idea who we were. We very quickly became the #1 injection technology solution in the United States and actually in the world, because we've been able to figure out what the tree needs were and how to best meet those needs while we continue to do research on new and evolving pests in the marketplace. There are a handful of companies which make or sell systems for injection that are considered practical. There are others that are sort of one-offs that somebody developed somewhere and is using. And there are many ways to treat trees. Some work better than others. So which tools work best? Which are easiest to use? Which are most productive? Because let's face it, the last thing you want to do is to sit by a tree for an hour or two while all the rest of your work is falling off, plate. And which ones will deliver the results your customers expect? Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you do if you don't get results. You can't tell a customer you tried. That's usually not particularly helpful. Some of the injection systems you might have heard of were caps. These are made by companies like Moget, sometimes Ace Caps, and I'll talk a bit more about them in a minute. Others are systems made by us, by a company called Arbor Systems, which some of you may have used in the past, and other systems that are made by Rainbow. These are the most common systems used in treating trees today. So one of the things that I've always wondered about is whether treatment method is truly important. Is the way you do this important? I happen to believe that that is, because effectiveness and productivity vary considerably among different treatment methods. There are soil drenches and soil injections. These are the tools that people use when they don't have the actual ability to inject a tree at all. There are legal limits when you're using insecticides. Typically, it's about 5 trees per acre that you could treat. So if you've got a number of trees on a property or 1 tree on 1/10 of an acre, you kind of reach your limit very quickly. Also, when you apply things to the soil, there are microbial degradations that occur. There's risk to groundwater. That's why they set limitations on things like imidacloprid and dinotefuran, because they can leach into the groundwater and cause problems. They're also slower to the target. When you put things into the soil, they have to be taken in by the roots and move their way up to the top of the tree. Now, while there are recommendations that we have for soil injection, and we in fact have a soil injection technology we're about to release, it is primarily for things like growth regulation and or organic solutions or nutrients that we recommend their use, not for the harder chemicals. Soil drenches and soil injections are cheaper because these are products that are mixed with water and then just poured into the soil in some fashion. There's annual retreatments. So many of these products will only give you 1 year. And while that may be okay for you, I'd much rather have 2 customers that I treat every other year than 1 customer that I treat every year. You can broaden your opportunity this way. There's added labor cost. And then, of course, there's consumers competing with you for methods of treatment. There are bark sprays. These are easy to apply, a great risk of leaching. We've got to move through the bark. And typically what we've found is that they're best against smaller, thinner bark trees, and they do have shorter residuals. Once again, they have legal limits on the annual use, and you as applicators or your people are of greater exposure because you're spraying the bark of the tree, which is up in the air. There are things called cambial injections. They're fast. These are systems made by Arbor Systems, not ArborJet. They can split the bark. The equipment is limited to a 1/2 mil to 1 mil per injection site. So oftentimes you'll see them recommending soil drenching at the same time as their injection because they can't get enough of a dose with injection alone. And splashback on applicators is a very common complaint I hear about cambial injections. These tools on the bottom left-hand side, these are called ChemJets. Each one of those gets filled with a chemistry, and then each one of them gets injected, and then they have to be refilled. Typically, people buy hundreds of these things in order to do a day's work. Foliar cover sprays may reduce adult feeding, which is typically not all that lethal unless you get into something like a gypsy moth where you get complete defoliation over a multi-year period. They will not control larval stages, which get into the trees and feed in the xylem or the cambium of the tree. So foliar coverage sprays are more designed for things that attack leaves. But of course, we know of issues with drift, with customers and neighbors, and the perception of us spraying up into the air these days. We mentioned caps earlier. They depend greatly on uptake conditions, tree health, and environmental factors. The pressure that is used with a cap is generally 6 psi, and it diminishes. The use of these has been diminishing over time because they take so long to inject a tree. This was the only solution 50 years ago, but you can't sit at a tree these days and wait, dependent upon the tree and the weather conditions to take care of the tree. We just don't have that kind of lack of productivity acceptable to any of us anymore. And there's microinfusion, which is essentially what we do with our tree IVs and F-series, and that's a QuickJet Air on the left-hand side, by the way, one of our most effective tools. There's a wide range of equipment options for any number of trees, whether you're treating 1 tree a week or 100 trees a day, whether you're going to go with plugs or plugless. There's a variety of pressures to meet the tree needs. We'll talk about plugs in a little while because they allow a rapid closeover of injection sites and all kinds of other benefits. I'm a very strong advocate for use of plugs, and ArborJet system provides those. Then there's this macroinfusion, which I described for you in some of the discussions about diseases. It was invented for Dutch elm disease, and it requires large volumes of water. It's very slow, requires root exposure. You have to excavate the surface roots, and then you inject. And it's definitely losing favor among applicators today. So you can see some of the caps up at the top here. You can see how many of them need to be installed in a tree. And again, they're typically very non-productive. Then there's the ChemJet, which I mentioned to you previously, with individual syringes. And then there's the Wedgel, which is made by Arbor Systems. Some of you may own it. Runs somewhere in the $500 or $600 range. Has very limited doses, and there's great risk of cambial damage because it tends to push the bark out from the tree. In fact, their old website advised that. It actually said, if you can't get the bark to slip, choose a different time of year, as if bark slippage is somehow a good thing. That's like saying that, having your skin come off is an acceptable thing because you can get an injection done underneath it. I'm sorry, I have a hard time with that stuff. It's just not arboriculture. Splashback, very common. So let's talk about these plugs and help you understand why they're so critical. We definitely encourage plug use. So what is this value of a plug? And what is a plug? Well, it keeps all injected material in the tree. So after we drill the hole, we tap a special plug into the tree. And it keeps the product from leaking out of injection sites, which quite frankly is not acceptable to the public. If it ever was, it certainly isn't today. It assures that the full dose reaches the target pest. When we're dealing with only a few milliliters per injection site, anything that leaks out means you're getting a less effective dose to protect the tree. Nothing splashes back at the applicator because there's a rubber septum in the center of this plug that is a one-way rubber septum. The material flows in when you pierce it, and when you pull the needle out, it doesn't flow out. It speeds up the closure of the tree injection site, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute or two. Reduces risk to the cambium by keeping the chemistry, which often have harsh solvents in them to dissolve them, away from the actively growing part of the tree, the cambium, which is right beneath the bark. And it also, by closing up that injection site right away, prevents any secondary invasion of insects or diseases. So this is what an arbor plug looks like. If you look at it on the left-hand side, we've cut one in half. There's the rubber septum that would be hidden from view if you had a full plug. The needle is piercing this in this particular example. You'll notice there are 3 barbs. These grip into the xylem of the tree when you tap it in, and we'll make sure that each of you joins and participates in this program will receive the training necessary to understand how to set a plug properly. There's an internal septum, and it assures that all the material stays in the tree. Here's a good cutaway as well, where we've cut it in half. This is where we've just simply set it in the tree, and we're getting ready to tap it in with a special plug setter. And here's one that's a smaller one that has been already set in the tree. And you can see the proper depth as it's placed in the tree into the xylem. More on that in just a moment. I want to show you as well, because we hear complaints in the old days, back when I first started working in this arena, of people worrying that we were somehow injuring trees, that there was some kind of damage to the trees occurring. All of these pictures show in different ways how after a plug is set, you get new growth over the top of the plug. This is the xylem closing it over. And then you get multiple years of growth as the tree continues on. It's been protected against whatever was attacking it. And you can see multiple years of growth occur in all of these samples as the trees just continue to grow and thrive. One has to remember that trees that are alive today, they had to survive boring insects of all sorts through their evolutionary process. If trees did not develop a means to address the boring of something into its bark, into its trunk, those trees would not be here today. They probably are not here today. We would not see them. So let's talk about proper plug setting. When we tap this plug in with a plug setter, and I'll show you those pictures in just a moment, we attempt to get it in the correct setting where the top of the plug, the widest part of the plug, is just into the tree xylem, and we'll see a little bit of white tissue when that occurs. You can actually hear the tree accepting these 3 barbs because it suddenly gets very dense sounding as we're tapping it in. This one has been set way too deeply, and all of the uptake tissue in here is being missed because all of the outlet of the chemistry is taking place here. Whereas this one is set in the bark, it's too shallow, which means that there's risk to the xylem, and it's quite likely that the tree will not close over the top of it, but rather attempt to push it out. So here's an example of one of those plugs that was shallow set on the top left. And this is what happens a few years later where the plug was not set properly and it's actually pushing out of the tree. On the center left, the deep set plug, all of that white xylem that I'm showing you is missed opportunity to inject the tree. In this tree where no plugs were used, this is with a different system entirely, you can see that this hole remains here unclosed 2 to 3 years after the injection was performed. The same thing in the one below it, they used corking material, but once you move the corking material, you've got a big old open hole. On the far bottom left, you can see a small line of white xylem, which is visible. This is how we know we've got a perfectly set plug. The xylem then grows over the top of the plug, and within a year, typically, this is what we see even as far north as New England. It closes over completely, and that's the goal. You've got bark over the top of it. You've got a completely sealed injection site. Again, another example of 2 years post-injection, a little bit of bark is formed on top of the plug, which we've cut through, and the tree continues to grow, and importantly, it thrives. Also, another interesting note here is if you look at the growth of the tree, it was having a period of slow growth during this time period. Now, I don't know if it was correlated with tree injury due to insects attacking or diseases, but the growth rings are substantially greater as we get further along in the last 3 years or so. And that was just an interesting thing I noted. So how does a plug work so well to do what's best for the tree? If you go in the forest, you're going to see on this left-hand side, anytime a tree branch dies, you'll typically see the decay will kill the branch over time, and eventually there's this hole left in the tree. And the branch collar, which we want to avoid cutting off, we talked about that yesterday, starts to close in, but because of gravity, it curls in. It doesn't actually close over. There's nothing to stop it. It just keeps curling in. If you do a properly chosen pruning cut, you will leave a branch stub in the center. You can see that here. The branch collar is untouched, but there's a branch stub. And what it does is it acts as a surface upon which the xylem can grow over the top of. So the branch stub actually helps the branch to close over, the tree to close over that stub. And ultimately, when everything coalesces, the old branch stub is completely covered. And that is the goal that acts the same way when we install an arbor plug. Much smaller hole, but the result is the same. The tree grows xylem over the top of the plug and closes it up, which is what I showed you in those previous pictures. Here's another example I find quite interesting. This happens to be a piece of hemlock. The tree was under attack by hemlock woolly adelgid. Look at the growth before attack, was looking pretty good. It was being put under attack for 3 years. This is where the bark was at the time that we injected. The plug was set. It was actually set 1 barb too shallow. So it was actually a shallow set plug, should have been deeper. But what happened afterwards was amazing. First, the tree put some bark down on top of the plug. Then, over the course of the next 3 years, look at the growth of the tree. It started to recover. And that's the beauty of injecting. You can protect a tree from the ground against a wide variety of tree-killing pests and get a very effective control for your customers. Here again, site closure with arbor plugs. You got 4 years of growth on this ash tree after injection. These are the places where the injections took place. This brown stuff, by the way, is the discoloration of the wood from the chemistry. The research using electron microscopy demonstrates there's no dead tissue here, that this is not decayed tissue whatsoever. It is discolored tissue. 4 years of growth. Just to get into some more tree physiology here, let's look at the way we define things on the right-hand side. The white tissue here is sapwood. This is typically considered good uptake tissue. This is the type of tissue that we're looking to inject into. So we want to get that youngest tissue, and typically in hardwoods, it's a shallower area. On conifers, we actually have a much broader amount of uptake tissue possible. We will often recommend, when we set plugs with hardwoods, going about 1.5 inches into the tree with the injection site and then setting the plug at the correct depth, just beneath the cambium start. But on pines, which have resinous tissue, we recommend you can go as deep as 2 inches and then set the plug properly to form a chamber behind the plug. So the sapwood is where we're trying to inject. The cambium is right at that surface. It's a growing surface. It's creating sapwood towards the inside, and it's creating phloem towards the outside. So this cambium is the actively reproducing tissue. And that's what we try to protect using our arbor plugs. The cambium will effectively be protected if you're using an arbor plug correctly. And the phloem moves nutrients down from the top of the tree, whereas the xylem, which is the rest of the growth, will actually move water up the tree to protect the tree and give the tree the necessary water supply it needs. Heartwood is found in many trees. Oftentimes it's discolored. Usually it's considered storage and structural, that there's not a lot of active movement of nutrients and water in the heartwood. And you can see the same thing as they are dissected here, identical to what I described for you on the right side. So when I talk about we want to inject in the xylem, we're talking about injecting in the tissue that is generally within the first inch or two of the tree. And when we're talking about treating and protecting the phloem and the cambium, it is that surface that's right beneath the bark that we're trying to protect. Here's an example of a dye injected into a tree where as you can see, the plug is assured that there's nothing extremely close to the cambium of the tree. Again, it's represented here as well, protecting the cambium from harsh chemicals that are typically the solvents found in most of the insecticide applications. So let's talk about why some of these systems tend to fail and how disappointing they can be to you, to your customers, and ultimately to the results you receive. Plugless injection technology. There are people who you will hear tell you, you don't need plugs. Plugs are just an extra cost to you. So I want to point out this plugless injection. This is a different company. This is not Arborjet equipment or technology. And what do we see? We see after the injection's done, chemistry leaking out of the tree. Now, remember, I mentioned to you previously, we have a situation here where every mil that's put into a tree is critical because the dose is based on mils. We're not talking gallons. So we're putting small doses into trees. And when you treat a tree and stuff is leaking out, number one, you may reduce effectiveness or longevity. You may also provide something that a child can come upon or a pet can come upon, creating a situation you don't want. Here are 3 other injection sites. You'll notice fluid leaking out of one that has no plug. Again, the same here. And here with a plug, you'll notice the site is completely dry. When you walk away from that tree, the only thing left is some sawdust on the ground shortly after injection. Another situation, no plugs. You can see the material flowing out of the injection site as the injectors were removed. Not an ideal situation by any stretch. Then there are injections without plugs that cause damage to the cambium and end up killing the cambium. These are all by a company that I won't leave nameless. They use a little thing that they describe as a plug. It's really just a little insert that you put in after you punch a hole into the tree. And then I found this damage. You can see these little plugs up here. I found this damage by tapping on the bark. It was hollow. And when I started to peel it away, you could see healing tissue here occurring. But the tree had hollow areas all the way around it like this from the injections. Sometimes they will cause damage this bad. Oftentimes it's just this. Now, do you want your customers looking at this? No, of course not. Secondarily, what impact does it have on the natural flow of the nutrients and the water in the tree? Not a good thing either. Again, this is what plugs protect you against. In this particular site, the same people that did this were treating these trees for emerald ash borer. If you'll notice, these trees have what's called epicormic sprouting. We talked about that yesterday. The tree is attempting to save itself. You can notice the thinner canopy. The leaves are just not able to get adequate water and nutrients. And when I examined this tree and looked up close, this picture in the center shows all these little red circles. These were all little injection sites. This tree had been injected 3 years in a row. Not once every 3 years, but 3 years in a row. And it still was losing the trees. Wrong chemistry, wrong methodology. And then the only solution left was this, removing the trees completely. There's all kinds of evidence that people tend to shop longer and to shop more comfortably in tree-lined areas. So this is not just a loss of these beautiful trees at one time. This is also a loss of attractiveness of the site for visiting and shopping. So what is our methodology? Well, we say it simply by drill, plug, and inject, but it's much more than just that. But we like to call it the drill, plug, and inject methodology. Here we've got 2 different technologies, our F-Series and our QuickJet Air. Let's get into more details. We measure the tree with a D-tape, a diameter tape. You'll need to own one of these. Always order one, and Arborjet sells them with a little hook on the bottom of it. I often ask people in private sessions, why do you think we have that hook? And they'll say, well, obviously to hook it into the tree. And I'll say, no, it's because if you didn't have a hook, you'd have to have 2 people measuring the tree. So you measure the tree first. Then you identify proper injection sites, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. You identify those sites based on the diameter of the tree. You'll know how many injection sites and how much chemistry is going to go into the tree. So you drill into the tree in the bottom 18 inches. I generally prefer the bottom 6 inches if I can. And we have special drill bits that come with the kits that you'll use because they're faster and clean. You'll set a plug into the hole, and then you'll tap that plug to the correct depth. Again, we usually use the sound of the dense material as the plug sets those 3 barbs, but then you'll also sometimes look in the hole and make sure you can see a little bit of white xylem. And then you'll inject the correct dose into the injection site. With our equipment, there's generally one choice or the other. When we're using our QuickJet Air, we'll calculate the number of injection sites by diameter at breast height divided by 2. And what's breast height? It's 4.5 feet up the tree. So roughly wherever your chest is, that's where you're measuring. And then you'll divide by 2 to get the number of injection sites. So a 12-inch tree needs 6 injection sites. With our F-Series, which I showed you on the previous page, and we'll get into more detail, we typically recommend diameter by 3. So if you've got a 12-inch tree, you're using 4 injection sites. Okay, so measure using the D-tape. These are the cheapest technology you can possibly buy. Everybody sells them. Ours is 20-something bucks. You can spend $100 if you want to on one that's really fancy. So when you lose it, you'll feel particularly bad. All tree treatments are calculating dose based on the tree diameter. The diameter is measured by circumference, but the tape actually calculates diameter. So you can see this gentleman measuring here, and you'll determine the tree diameter, and from that, the label will tell us the dose. If you guess the diameter, it means you're either going to under or overdose the tree. You're going to spend too much, or you're going to use too little and limit the effectiveness. I've had sessions where I'll ask people to guess the diameter of the tree. Almost no one ever guesses the correct diameter, no matter how long they've been treating trees. Again, tree diameters are measured 4.5 feet up the trunk, but the injections occur low on the tree. Trees with multiple trunks that split low are measured and treated as individual trees. This would be a tree that's coming out of the ground and splitting in the very first few inches of the tree. With higher splits, you can measure and inject as a single tree. So this is where you can treat a tree with a single set of injections, whereas if the tree splits very low, you might treat them as individual trees, measure them separately and inject them separately. More details from your RTM, your technical manager, as you begin to experience the treatment of trees. How do you choose injection sites? We like to choose injection sites where we've got strong movement of the vascular tissue down into the root system. So these circular areas here are good places where injection can take place. This is often referred to as either, oh gosh, it's slipping my mind. Trent, help me out here. What do we call those sites?
The flares, the trunk flare, Rob, is that what you're looking for?
That's what I was zoning out on. So sometimes they're called trunk flares, sometimes they're called root flares. Depends on who you talk to. It's really synonymous. But these will typically allow you the fastest uptake into the tree. Where then do we want to avoid? We want to avoid the cracks and crevices and the compressed areas on trees. And why do we want to avoid them? For 2 reasons. The goal is to inject the correct chemistry into the tree to protect it, not to simply inject the tree. So we want to avoid damaged areas. We want to avoid what we call compression wood. The X on the far left would be wood that would be much harder to inject through, much like a knot on a tree when we're trying to bang a nail into a tree. It's very difficult. So compression wood, cracks and crevices, avoid them. And flat spots on the trunk, which indicate that there might be something wrong under the ground that you can't see. You avoid those spots as you're choosing your injection sites. What factors affect trunk injection uptake? This is also a critical piece of information for someone that is new to the injection process. And so I'd like to sort of give you some sense of clues here. Physical problems with the tree, obviously going to be a potential problem. Do you have a girdling root? Is there injured bark? That compression wood that I showed you a picture of, other old wound sites that if you read the bark correctly, you can see. Those can all be reasons why you might have a difficult time injecting a tree in those spots if the temperatures are either very cold or very hot. So it's generally recommended that you want soil temperatures up into the mid 40s before you're injecting trees, because you need movement of the material from the tree roots, which are now active, up into the tree. It's through a photosynthetic process that you're having evapotranspiration, and you end up with moving or tapping into the flow of the tree. And by doing so, you're getting the product up into the tree. If it's too cold in the soil, then it will slow down your injection process. Likewise, if the air is too cold, I've injected trees when it was in the 20s that morning, and it moves much more slowly. And when it's hot, we have the stomata on the leaves shutting down, which slows the whole pipeline of movement of water through the tree, therefore slowing your process down. In fact, we've actually had situations where people have come in and watered a few hours before or the night before, or asked a homeowner to water if there was drought stress, and the tree performed significantly better with just that kind of attention. Lastly, on that section, when you get to a certain point in the fall, even if the leaves are still on, they're starting to change color, they've actually senesced from the tree. They're just hanging on, they haven't fallen off, but they're no longer functional. When you get to that point, when you've got more than a salt and pepper appearance, it's probably a little late for injecting the tree. We talked about moisture extremes a bit in the last mention, but drought or excessive rainfall and the soil moisture holding capacity of a tree can affect uptake. It's interesting because excessive wind may close the leaf stomata so that they don't lose too much moisture, but light winds will allow for evapotranspiration. So the ideal time to inject a tree is when you've got a light windy day. It seems to provide just that additional support. High humidity reduces water loss from leaves and slows evapotranspiration. So you get one of those really hot, very dry, very humid summer, middle of the days. You're not going to get good uptake time during those time periods. Whereas in the early part of the day or in the later afternoon, we seem to see an improvement in uptake even in the hot, humid weather. And then we need to understand that there are 3 different kinds of wood tissue. They have larger or smaller pores. Think of them as big straws and small straws. And they're known as ring porous, diffuse porous, or tracheid types. And most of the conifers are tracheid types, which means they have much smaller injection tissue or vascular tissue. Ring porous trees are the fastest. They have the largest openings. Diffuse porous somewhere in between. But knowing what tree you've got and what kind of pores it has will give you an indication of whether it'll be a fast uptake tree or a slow uptake tree. And then, of course, the most important one is applicator skill. Did you set the plug too shallow or too deep? And are you aware of all that stuff above so you can plan and price accordingly? So let's talk briefly about ArborJet equipment. There are 3 main groups of equipment that you will be able to acquire. One is called the ArborJet QuickJet. This is a handheld device that is really designed for a limited number of trees. If you've only got a tree here and a tree there that you might be treating, because it is hand operated with no air pressure or compression, it is a little bit harder to use on trees that have finer root, finer vascular tissue. But it is perfect for the one-off tree that you're going to treat once in a while until you build a program for yourself. The ArborJet QuickJet Air is our truly universal tool for most insect applications. It is pressured where you can get up to 80 to 100 psi of pressure. We have an air tank that is pressurized that can be repeatedly repressurized with plain old compressed air. We have a bottle that is attached to it where you put your chemistry, or in most cases, most of our bottles will screw right on to the cap, the actual chemical bottle that you can use. And you can measure and assess the dose clearly here. We'll get into more details there soon. This is our premium device. This is used by more cities and more people across the country than any device we own and make. Then we get into our F series. This is to really help us with a wide variety of chemistry needs. So with most of our disease applications, we use a little bit more fungicide and water, then this is ideal because we've got 1.5 liters and a 3/4 liter bottle. You get 2 sets of those. You use a pump to compress it. It's a very cool system. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So let's talk about the QuickJet Air first. It can be attached to the bottles as well, or to the medicine bottle. It's hand operated. You've got a measurement of a dose. You can see what you're doing. Lower cost application. It's a perfect solution for our R10 triage because we use such a low dose in that device. Can also be used to diagnose a tree's health. You can use it with water to figure out whether the tree's going to take product in very easily or not, or what kind of a day you're having, or what kind of a species you've got. So just by putting water into this and doing an injection, you'll know very quickly whether that tree is going to take up product very easily, again, as a diagnostic device. I view it as a starter kit for someone just getting into trunk injection with limited numbers of trees. I want to be very clear there. Getting into injection is not based on time. It's based on how much work you've got. The QuickJet Speedy Delivery System in fast uptake trees allows you to work effectively and profitably. The operative word there is fast uptake trees. Slower uptake trees, I generally recommend one of the other 2 solutions so that you're not working as hard at it. With adequate moisture, low volume injections with QuickJet are good on ring porous oaks and diffuse porous trees such as maples. Our F series is the next step up. This is a series I mentioned has 1.5 liters and 3/4 liter bottles. It is interconnected, so each injection can inject multiple sites from a single bottle. You'll notice they have this hex, which allows up to 6 injection sites and 6 injection injectors on each individual one. It's fast. It can go up to 120 PSI, which is really great pressure. These valves turn with only a 1/4 turn, so they're very easy to use as well. This hex assembly of 4 to 6 parallel injection lines is the most effective way to deliver injection in coming from a single bottle. It also has a quick fill spout, which is visible here on the far right side, that allows you to open the spout without taking the cover off. And this allows you a very quick fill. You can also expand this by connecting in here at the center of this hex to another hex and allow you to put 12 injectors on a single bottle, which is ideal for larger volume needs or fungicides. And you pressurize it with a hand pump that I showed you previously that comes with the kit. This is what it looks like when it's in action. You can see we're injecting a larger tree here with 2 bottles with half the chemistry in each bottle. We drill the holes, we set the plugs, we put the injectors on, we close all these injectors, we open up all these injectors, then we open up this and it all flows evenly into the tree. This is a closer up version of what it looks like, our F series. And this is a moderately priced device that allows you to treat a wide variety of insect and disease situations. The next one I'll mention to you is our ArborJet QuickJet Air. It's the most perfect device we've developed thus far for insecticidal applications, not as much of a preferred choice for disease applications which require higher volume. The QuickJet Air main components are the medicine bottle, which can be replaced with the bottle right out of the container that it comes in, a cap which is not pressurized, and then the pressurized air that works through a regulator to deliver pressure and chemistry directly to our device. It's our best weapon, and it's considered the gold standard. It combines simplicity, it combines power, it's lightweight, weighing less than 2 pounds. It's an easy-to-use injection tool that maximizes productivity and reduces labor time. So it features this one thumb switch operation. I'll show you that in just a moment more closely. It has precise dose measuring. There's never a guess that the chemistry has gotten into the tree. You can actually see the dose entering the tree. The aluminum body is less than 2 pounds. So here's what it looks like. You've got measurement here that can be adjusted using this wheel from 1 to 5 mils. This switch simply turns it on or off and sends the plunger in and sends the product into the tree. And it's connected to our air power, which is directly pressurizing it for you. Here's what it looks like when it's used. It can be used two different ways. One is directly with the needle going directly into the tree through the plug. Some people will attach a special attachment to it, which allows you to stand up and do your injection instead of kneeling down, and uses the same system as our F-Series. These are available. This is how it comes standard. This extra attachment can be ordered as well. It's a very cool device. I'm going to see if I can't get this to actually hear audio. There's a tool that says optimize screen sharing for video clip. I'm going to try that and see if that makes a difference. Let's see if we can get this. Can you guys hear anything?
Yep, I can hear it, Rob.
Okay, good. So this is setting a plug and injecting a palm tree with our QuickJet Air system. Very quick one. I'll show you a little bit longer. This is using it on a hardwood.
Today we're going to be injecting this maple tree. First, what we're going to do is measure it to see how big it is at diameter at breast height. From there, we'll consult the label bottle to see how much injection chemical we're going to be putting into the tree. Once we've determined that, we're going to drill, plug, and inject. Next, we'll set our arbor plug. Now we've already loaded the chemical into the product bottle for our QuickJet Air, and now we're ready to inject. You continue around the rest of the tree until all the injection sites are completed, and then you're all done.